November 18th, 1978. A tropical jungle deep in Guyana falls silent, interrupted only by the rustle of wind through palm trees and the eerie stillness of death. Over 900 bodies lie motionless, sprawled across makeshift rows like fallen dominoes, their limbs twisted, their faces frozen in a mixture of confusion and agony. Among them are mothers still cradling infants, toddlers curled beside older siblings, and elders collapsed under open skies. They drank willingly, or maybe they didn't. Some were injected, others resisted, but the result was the same. An entire community wiped out in a single night, and at the center of it all stood one man, Jim Jones, the self-proclaimed prophet turned orchestrator of one of the most horrifying mass tragedies in American history. This wasn't just suicide. It wasn't even just murder. This was the destruction of hope itself. A cult that began with a promise of equality and sanctuary had become a slaughterhouse. And the question the world still asks, how did it happen? It didn't begin in the jungle. It began with a voice that preached about justice, racial harmony, and a better world. A voice that captivated the broken, the outcast, the disillusioned. Jim Jones was charismatic, electric, and dangerously persuasive. In a time when America was drowning in war fatigue, political betrayal, and civil unrest, he gave people something to believe in. The People's Temple started in Indiana, moved to California, and drew thousands with its radical message of inclusion and socialism. White people, black people, the poor, the elderly, he welcomed them all. He fed them, clothed them, healed them, at least on the surface. Underneath, he was tightening his grip, laying the foundation for absolute control. By the mid-70s, Jones had grown paranoid. He saw enemies everywhere, journalists, politicians, defectors. Whispers of abuse began to surface, forced labor, punishment beatings, children taken from parents, and above all, the promise that anyone who left the temple would suffer a fate worse than death. In 1977, under mounting scrutiny, Jones made a bold move. He led over 900 followers into the remote jungles of Guyana, South America. There they would build their utopia, a promised land free from capitalism, racism, and government oppression. He called it Jonestown. They arrived with hope in their hearts. What they found was mud, bugs, and back-breaking labor. Under the oppressive heat and constant surveillance, the cracks began to show. Jones's speeches, once uplifting, turned apocalyptic. He preached about spies, sabotage, and nuclear war. He played recorded cries of torture over loudspeakers at night. Sleep deprivation, food rationing, fear. Everything that had once seemed holy was now haunted, and yet many stayed. Why? Because they believed. Because they had given up their homes, their money, their identities. Because Jones made them believe they had no other choice. Letters were censored, visits were denied, armed guards patrolled the jungle. It wasn't a commune, it was a prison. And Jim Jones held the only key. Far away in California, worried families tried to raise alarms. They contacted the government, begged for help, told anyone who would listen that their loved ones were trapped. One woman, Deborah Layton, escaped and wrote a detailed affidavit, exposing the abuse, the threats, the rehearsals for mass suicide. She called it a death camp. Congressman Leo Ryan listened, and he decided to act. Ryan flew to Guyana with a team of journalists, aides, and concerned relatives. On November 17, 1978, he entered Jonestown. At first, Jones staged a welcome. Smiles, applause, chants of gratitude. But beneath the surface, fear buzzed like static. Some residents passed notes to Ryan. They wanted out. They begged for rescue. And suddenly, the facade began to crumble. The next day, Ryan gathered the defectors and prepared to leave. But as they reached the Port Kaituma airstrip, tragedy struck. A dump truck rolled up. Armed guards from Jonestown jumped out and opened fire. Congressman Leo Ryan was shot and killed. So were 3 journalists and 1 defector. Others lay bleeding on the tarmac, including future Congresswoman Jackie Spire. And while blood soaked the runway, back in the jungle, Jim Jones gave his final sermon. He called it revolutionary suicide. He said it was the only escape from the horrors to come. The children went first, poisoned with cyanide-laced punch, often by the hands of their own parents. Nurses administered doses. Guards ensured compliance. Some resisted. Some ran. Some were held down. But most, dazed, broken, and hypnotized by years of indoctrination, followed orders. Jim Jones didn't drink the poison. He was found with a bullet in his head. Whether self-inflicted or not remains unclear. When Guyanese authorities arrived, they found the nightmare made real. Rows of bodies in matching clothes, children foaming at the mouth, silence so heavy it suffocated the air. 909 people were dead. Over 300 of them were children, and the world had no words. What followed was a scramble for answers. The FBI launched one of the most extensive investigations in its history. Survivors were questioned, tapes were recovered, cyanide residue was analyzed. A project called REMUR, short for Ryan Murder, was born. It uncovered layers of manipulation, psychological warfare, and a man who fancied himself both God and executioner. One Temple loyalist, Larry Layton, who had opened fire inside the Cessna at the airstrip, was tried and convicted. He served 18 years. He was the only person to be prosecuted in the United States for the events at Jonestown. But what about everyone else? The guards, the enablers, the ones who carried out Jones's final orders? Most of them died in the mass poisoning, and the few who survived, some defectors, some in Georgetown, some who were sent on errands, were left to carry the weight of what they'd escaped. The story of Jonestown isn't just about death. It's about deception, devotion, and the terrifying power of belief. It's about a man who weaponized faith, who preyed on the vulnerable, and who convinced nearly 1,000 people that death was salvation. It's about families torn apart, children never given a chance. It's about a government too slow to act, and a society that didn't see the warning signs until it was too late. Even now, decades later, the questions linger. Was it suicide or murder? Could it have been prevented? What if Ryan had brought more help? What if Layton hadn't opened fire? What if someone had pulled the plug on Jones years before he built his jungle kingdom? These aren't just historical hypotheticals. They're echoes that still ripple through every documentary, every interview, every survivor's haunted eyes. Because Jonestown isn't just a moment in history, it's a warning, a blood-stained reminder of what happens when one man is given absolute power over desperate people. It's a mirror held up to every cult, every tyrant, every system that silences dissent and worships control. The faces of the dead still stare up from old photographs, smiling, believing, trusting, not knowing that their faith would become their funeral. And this is only the beginning. The morning after the massacre, the sun rose over Jonestown in eerie silence. The jungle buzzed with life, indifferent to the bodies lying still beneath it. Birds chirped, insects crawled, and vines swayed in the breeze. But the people, the hundreds of souls who once sang, worked, laughed, were gone. There were no screams anymore, only the stench of death, the sticky warmth of blood on wooden planks, and the long, endless echo of disbelief. Rescue teams arrived to a scene beyond imagination. Men and women scattered in symmetrical rows, as if laid out for inspection. Babies still wrapped in blankets. Toddlers collapsed beside cups. Some clutched each other in their final moments. Others lay alone, arms outstretched as if trying to crawl away. The largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act before 9/11. And the world was just waking up to it. The bodies decomposed under the tropical heat, making identification nearly impossible. The FBI's disaster squad worked for weeks, collecting fingerprints, dental records, anything to name the dead. Some families would never see their loved ones again. Others had to bury children they'd begged to bring home. News stations broadcast images of the dead, frozen in time. Congress held hearings, churches lit candles. But for many, the horror felt too big, too surreal, too impossible. How could a church, a place meant to heal, become the site of such devastation? The surviving members of the People's Temple were scattered. Some were in Georgetown, too far to return before the poison ran its course. Others had been sent out by Jones on missions, unaware they would return to a ghost town. Among them was Tim Carter, who'd been given a suitcase full of money to deliver to the Soviet embassy, proof of Jones's shifting alliances and his increasing desperation to escape America's grasp. He survived. But the guilt, the weight of those he left behind, would follow him forever. Then there was Hyacinth Thrash, an elderly black woman who, overcome by fear and illness, had hidden under her bed during the mass suicide. When she emerged, hours later, everyone was dead. She had been left behind, forgotten by death, spared by accident. Her testimony was quiet but chilling. She described the chants, the wails, the baby's cries, and then silence. Her story, like those of the other survivors, would serve as the only living witness to the final hours of Jonestown. In the aftermath, the US government faced uncomfortable truths. How had Jones amassed so much power without intervention? Why were reports of abuse ignored? Why had the temple been allowed to operate a compound in a foreign country with armed guards, barbed wire, and military drills? The FBI's investigation, dubbed Rye Moore, collected thousands of documents, tapes, and interviews, but much of the damage had already been done. And while the facts were grim, the speculation was worse. Conspiracy theories began to grow like vines around the truth. Some claimed Jonestown was a CIA mind control experiment. Others suggested Jones had been working with foreign governments. The tapes recovered from the site, hours of Jones's ramblings, were dissected frame by frame, sentence by sentence, in search of deeper meaning. But sometimes evil doesn't need a greater conspiracy. Sometimes it only needs one man with charisma, a platform and a following too afraid to question him. The name Jonestown became shorthand for cult extremism. Schools taught it in history books. Films dramatized it. Documentaries replayed the screams from the death tape. The final recording of Jones urging his followers to die with dignity. The phrase, "drink the Kool-Aid," a cruel twist on the reality of what happened, entered the language, an ignorant reduction of a massacre into a punchline. But this wasn't just mass suicide. It was coercion. It was manipulation. It was mass murder disguised as devotion. And in the center of it all was Jim Jones. His body was found with a single bullet wound to the head. Some believe he pulled the trigger. Others think he had someone do it for him. He didn't drink the poison. He never planned to. He delivered death from the pulpit, then slipped away with a gunshot while his congregation gasped for air. Even in the end, he remained a coward hiding behind prophecy. But for those left behind, the nightmare didn't end with the last breath of Jonestown. Family members back home received phone calls telling them their children were dead. Survivors lived in fear of retaliation, judgment, and shame. Jackie Spire, one of Leo Ryan's aides, who was shot 5 times at the airstrip, went on to become a congresswoman. Her body bore the bullets, but her voice carried the truth. She told the story again and again, fighting to ensure the world never forgot what happened to the man who tried to bring the truth to light. And what of Leo Ryan, a sitting US congressman gunned down while rescuing American citizens? His bravery is etched in the history of the House of Representatives. He walked into a cult compound with nothing but a clipboard and questions, and he died because he dared to ask them. His sacrifice wasn't in vain, but it came too late for the hundreds who believed Jones' lies. Today, the Jonestown site remains empty, Vines have overtaken the pavilions. The jungle has erased the paths, but the ghosts remain. Every year, on the anniversary, flowers are left. Names are whispered, and silence hangs heavy in the humid air. Memorials have been erected, archives have been preserved, and still questions linger. Could it happen again? In many ways it already has. Cults didn't end with Jonestown. They changed form. They took to the internet, disguised themselves in politics, spirituality, wellness, but the patterns are the same: isolation, control, fear, loyalty, and the promise of salvation in exchange for surrender. Jim Jones didn't invent the cult. He simply gave it a stage, a name, and 918 coffins. His legacy isn't power, it's a warning. A warning that blind faith is the most dangerous poison of all, that anyone, any family, any friend, any neighbor can fall prey to the right voice at the wrong time. That when truth is replaced with obedience, even paradise becomes a graveyard. In the end, Jonestown wasn't just a tragedy. It was a message carved in stone and sealed in blood. Never give your soul to someone who demands silence. Never follow a man who demands devotion without question. And never forget the names of those who died in the jungle because they believed love lived there. Their names are etched into the memorials. Their photos are framed in grieving homes. They were teachers, mothers, artists, elders, children. They danced, they sang, they hoped, and then they drank what they were told would bring peace, but peace never came. And so we remember them not as cultists, but as victims, not as followers, but as people. Ordinary people who were failed by a man, a system, and a world that didn't see the storm coming until the rain had already drowned them. 918 souls, one voice, and a tragedy that still echoes through the trees of Guyana.